I'm joined today by Joel Pollak. He is an influential journalist and political commentator in the United States and has very strong ties to South Africa. He was born in Johannesburg. His wife is from South Africa. He also studied at the University of Cape Town and was a speechwriter for Tony Leon. Joel, thank you very much for joining us today and for getting up really early to join us. Um,
Well,
our
I'd be
first
up
question,
early anyway. This is how we have to roll here.
yeah. Our first question is South Africa is currently making headlines in the United States for all the wrong reasons. This has not happened before. Why has South Africa become such a high profile country, especially since President Donald Trump has taken office?
Well, I think the reason for that is South Africa occupies a strategic position geographically. When Barack Obama was president, his Secretary of State, John Kerry, complained after Russia invaded Crimea that Vladimir Putin was still playing by 19th century rules and that you simply don't invade someone else's land in the 21st century. And because the Obama administration had been convinced that the 21st century meant sophistication and social media and technology, that the old rules didn't apply. And the fact is that the 19th century never left us, and that geography is as important today as it was when the British took over the Cape, and for the same reason. South Africa occupies a very important position on international trade routes, and the Chinese have been trying to control international trade. Other opponents of the United States have managed, in fact, to choke off international trade. For example, the Houthis, who are armed and funded by Iran, have managed to end a significant portion of the shipping that passes through the Red Sea by attacking international shipping in an attempt to hurt Israel and the United States. So it's become very clear that geography still matters to global trade. And President Trump, if you've noticed, has taken an interest in various different strategic points, including Greenland and Gaza. Gaza is near the Suez Canal, not right on top of it, but in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's still in a potentially very important position. So I think geography is the simplest explanation. But keep in mind that President Trump has also taken an interest in the issue of human rights in South Africa since his first term. He did speak out against expropriation back in 2018, and now that South Africa has passed an expropriation act, that concern has risen to new levels, and I think that fundamentally is what's driving this. South Africa's domestic policies have made it a problem for the United States. South Africa is supposed to be an ally of the democratic West, but is instead behaving in a fashion that is more in line with either failed states, you could say, of the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, or in some ways as an ally of China, Russia, Iran. So South Africa's own domestic policies have also put it on the radar.
And expanding more to international policies, could you please expand a little bit about some of the international stances or how South Africa has played on the world stage that might have alienated the United States?
Well, South Africa's been in the headlines for two reasons over the last year or two. One is the transgender issue. South Africa has a very controversial athlete who is at the center of some of the debates around gender and international sporting competitions, and that's a big topic in the United States. So Caster Semenya has been driving some of the news. And the other reason is the ICJ case against Israel. South Africa decided, after terrorists murdered nearly 1,200 people, most of whom were civilians, in Israel on October 7th, 2023, that it would take Israel and not Hamas to the International Court of Justice and accuse Israel of genocide. Israel, acting in self-defense, has attacked Hamas in Gaza. Hamas, acting out of purely genocidal motives, attacked Israel. So South Africa has taken a stance that is at odds with morality, essentially, and has led a global movement of anti-Israel countries and organizations that have also, in anti-Semitic terms, targeted the Jewish state. And Israel has very strong support in the United States, so South Africa's stance has really been a problem. It's been one that has been followed closely in the United States, and it has really puzzled people who once saw South Africa as a paragon of human rights. The ICJ case is the opposite. The ICJ case places South Africa on the opposite side of the argument about human rights, and that's another foreign policy that has really irked Americans, and particularly the Trump administration.
And speaking of recent developments, President Trump recently announced Leo Brent Bozell III to be the next U.S. ambassador to
It's
South
just Brent
Africa.
Bozell. Nobody here calls him Leo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Brent Bozell.
yeah, Brent
Um,
Bozell. Yeah.
yes. So many people did expect you to be nominated for this position, but what is your reaction to this appointment, and what message does this appointment send to South Africa?
In many ways, it's the right appointment because the job of a South African ambassador, or rather a U.S. ambassador to South Africa right now, is to be tough with the South African government. Because the South African government, after many, many warnings and after back and forth in the early months of the Trump administration, still has not come to the table with policy compromises. So the Trump administration is sending someone who will be uncompromising so that South Africa finally understands it has to change. And it's rather interesting that when I was seen as one of the likely candidates to receive that appointment, people complained and they said all kinds of things, and they said I was a right-wing ideologue, and that's a nicer description than some were giving me. Well, you're now going to get the real deal. You're going to get someone who is a staunch conservative who will not really care what South Africa thinks, or perhaps not even really notice the nuance of South African domestic politics and history. It simply won't matter to him. He's going to represent President Trump, and he's going to do so in a staunch manner. So good luck with that. I think it might be the right choice for that reason.
And on the topic of ambassadors, another big story was South Africa's now former ambassador to the US, Ibrahim Rasool. He was expelled from the United States for remarks he made against President Trump during a webinar. Would you please share your thoughts on Rasool's comments and subsequent actions that were taken, and possibly the reaction of South Africa to what happened?
Sure. Well, Ibrahim Rasool expressed views that an ambassador should not express, at least while an ambassador. You can have those views, you can express them before or after, but you don't call the president of your host country a white supremacist who's leading essentially a racist movement around the world. I mean, that's just crazy. I think Rasool thought that what he said was okay because that's the conventional wisdom among South African elites, and I think that his expulsion should also be a wake-up call to South Africans who have misinterpreted Trump and the reasons he was elected and the people who voted for him. And I see that he's also made some defamatory statements about me. On his return, he suggested that I was listening into his seminar under assumed name. None of that happened. I saw the seminar after it had already been posted publicly by the organization that hosted it, and I was not in the seminar under an assumed name or my own name or anyone else's name. And, you know, in South Africa that might be grounds for a legal case, but I'll just let Rasool stew in his own juices. I think he deserved to be expelled, but also, again, it should be a warning to South Africans that they are really at odds with reality, I think, with their understanding of the Trump administration, at least as far as the chattering classes, the political pundits, and so forth. Trump was elected on a popular mandate to achieve change in the United States, and he wasn't elected by nativists and racists and all the things that Rasool cited. He was elected by working Americans and by an unprecedented number of American minorities, including black voters, Hispanic voters. Trump won the vote among Hispanic men. So it's very hard to call them white supremacists. And I think South Africa should accept the Trump presidency as legitimate and as something it has to deal with, and something with which it should compromise before it's too late to save this relationship.
And a big development that happened in South Africa last year was the ANC losing its long-standing majority, falling to around 39% of the vote, and they formed what they called the Government of National Unity, just largely just a broad-based coalition with ideologically opposing parties like the Democratic Alliance. Has this development of the coalition maybe softened America's view, changed in any way, or has South
No,
Africa's
not at
action?
all. Not at all. Not at all. The ANC occupies the most important ministries in terms of relations with other countries. So the ANC kept for itself the foreign ministry, which I suppose is called DIRCO. It kept the minerals and energy. It kept the major industries. And really, to those of us who were watching from the outside, it was a great mystery that the Democratic Alliance, which had done so well in the election, didn't do better for itself in the negotiation around the government of national unity. In fact, I think, and I wrote at the time, that the DA should have done, in my personal view, what it had done in Cape Town in 2006, and that is to assemble a coalition of opposition parties to take power, because you don't know if a chance like that's going to come again. Yes, the ANC could stay below 50%, but are you going to perform as well as you did in 2024? So I think that the opposition should have taken the opportunity to take power, even with a coalition of many smaller parties that might have been even more unstable than the GNU has been. But since it decided to go into a GNU, it should have taken more important ministries, and especially the foreign ministry. If you cannot control how your country is perceived by the outside world, then you're not really part of a coalition government. You're basically just along for the ride, and people will blame you for what your government does, no matter what it does. So I think that the GNU has made absolutely no impact whatsoever, because the ANC continues to behave in the way it does, and the ANC's likely partners on the outside in the event that the GNU fails are people like Julius Malema and the EFF. And I should also say, just since we're talking about that, that the decision of the Constitutional Court to deny even leave to appeal in the case of the Kill the Boer speech, which is clearly incitement, and in a context when people are talking about genocide and throwing around that term, it's quite serious. That phrase, that song, Malema repeated it on Human Rights Day. People noticed it, not just out there on social media. People noticed it in the White House. And to refuse even to hear the appeal sends a message that the institutions to which South Africans like to point, and to say that they've got such a wonderful constitution and they've got such moral authority around the world and soft power, as President Cyril Ramaphosa said, that undermines all of that. And so now it looks like some of the more feverish things being said about South Africa, about what's being done to Afrikaners, what's being done to farmers, those all seem much more credible now to an American audience. So the GNU has not softened that image. And really the representative of South Africa, I'm sorry to say, on the international stage is effectively Julius Malema, because that's what makes the news, that's what people see, and South Africa has been unable to respond to it. Its institutions are failing. So unfortunately, the GNU has not softened that image.
And when it comes to representing South Africa on the international stage in local news agencies, we've been reading that there's huge divisions within the GNU. That the ANC want to make sure that the decision comes solely from them because, like you said, they control DIRCO. Meanwhile, the partners say that they want to have an input of it. Regardless of who it is, what sort of, especially because of the image that South Africa has now, what sort of figure should be going to Washington, do you believe?
It's not about the person. It has nothing to do with who you send. You could send Julius Malema, it wouldn't matter. The important thing is the policy. South Africa has to change its policies and then send someone who is going to deliver the message that the policies have been changed. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what color they are. It doesn't matter what party they're from. The South African government must change its policies on land expropriation, on the international stage, on black economic empowerment. Foreign investors do not want to come in and give up their equity to a complete stranger simply because they're the right color and they're attached to the right party. The world does not work that way. So unless there's a clear perception that policies have changed, it really doesn't matter who you send.
Mm. And now speaking about South Africa hosting the G20. So Secretary of State Marco Rubio has already made his intentions clear that he won't attend the G20 hosted by South Africa as it stands. Do you think, as it's going currently, the United States will not participate in this year's G20, or how do you think they'll contribute with South Africa's presidency? Because especially the theme that South Africa chose, I remember Secretary Rubio did take exception to the theme as a whole, and
Yeah,
then
I mean, it's a
now.
socialist theme. I mean, we're not going to participate in a socialist conference. So it's the wrong message. South Africa has to get off the idea of redistribution, the idea of solidarity with all of these marginal, sometimes terrorist struggles all over the world. The most important thing is growth and opportunity. That's all people care about. It's all people should care about, because that's the only way to redress the injustices of the past, is to create more opportunity for the future, not to take opportunity away from other people, which you can't do anyway because they'll just leave. So I think South Africa needs, again, to change its policies, and then it's possible the Trump administration might participate. I do think the president would like to visit South Africa at some stage, but he's not going to do so as long as South Africa continues on the present path. There has to be a move toward compromise. The GNU is actually an opportunity to do that. So hopefully South Africa will come through.
Yes. And I know you were speaking about some of the policies that there needs to be change of policies. Just in especially the short term, what are some of the examples of the policy changes or that should be done either domestically and internationally that could smooth relations?
Well, as I've said, the Expropriation Act should be amended so that it is very clear about protecting private property rights. There should be explicit protections for minority rights. Afrikaners have made it very clear, both in South Africa and the United States, that their language is under threat, and they've said they are not being given their civil rights under the Constitution to govern their own schools and to use their own language, so that would go a long way. Changes in BEE. I think foreign companies need to be exempted from Black economic empowerment laws, which are very difficult, confusing, and which are being dropped in the United States. I mean, we have a much softer equivalent called diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's being abandoned because it doesn't work. It actually hurts the people it's supposed to help. So I would exempt foreign investors from that. And then I think South Africa, despite everything that's been said about how important the ICJ case is to South Africa, it's not important to South Africa at all. South Africa is wasting money on this ICJ case, and it's destroying its own international image. It would actually be in South Africa's interest to drop the ICJ case and tell the Palestinians to give up terror, to suspend the armed struggle, sit down, and negotiate peace. I think if South Africa did that, then I think you'd start to see the conversation change.
And there is another thing that's garnered attention internationally was the fight in Johannesburg about the changing of Sandton Drive, where the U.S. Consulate is based, to Leila Khalid. She was a plane hijacker and Palestinian plane hijacker. So the ANC have said that national ANC leaders have said that they want to do it as a message to the US, that they won't be bullied. So the Johannesburg Council recently struck down a motion to halt it, but now national government intervened just to put it on ice. They didn't say that they want to cancel it. They said just for now not to change the name, but they said it will go ahead. What do you think of the ramifications of such a name change because of the symbolism of where the US consulate is based?
I've said before that if the Johannesburg authorities change the name of that street, and again, the motivation is clearly to force the United States to endorse a terrorist, then the consulate will likely be closed. And there's just no way that Americans like me would ever travel to South Africa again, frankly. Maybe that makes some South Africans happy, but it's completely appalling that this person who would have killed hundreds of other people, who tried to hijack airplanes and only failed to kill people because other people intervened. I mean, it was very lucky. She was imprisoned for life, and she was only released because of a hostage or prisoner exchange, or whatever you want to call it. But I mean, it's absolutely disgraceful that this person is somehow venerated in South Africa. And to me, watching the Johannesburg City Council meeting where this was discussed, what was really upsetting were all the anti-Semitic things that were being said toward a Jewish member of the council He was told to take off his head covering. He was told he couldn't have an Israeli flag, even as a symbol of peace, on his computer laptop. And they had to pause the council meeting for several minutes after the motion failed because the ANC and I suppose the EFF and others were dancing and celebrating and singing that they had celebrated some kind of victory, that had won something by retaining the name of this terrorist hijacker as the soon-to-be hero of Santon Drive, Leila Khalid. So, very few of us want to have anything to do with a city that functions that way. And Santon is seen as the international financial capital of Africa, and it's one of South Africa's most important assets. If that's what South Africa does with it, why should we be involved at all? I don't think South Africans understand how badly some of this is perceived by the outside world. And the rot is deep. It's very deep. I lived in Cape Town for 6 or 7 years, and I lived for 4 of those years in the Muslim neighborhood of the Bo-Kaap, which was at the time a very lovely and tolerant place. And I had very close friends among Muslim neighbors, some of whom I am occasionally in contact with. And I don't think I could go there today. In fact, I know I couldn't because I was accosted the last time I tried. If I walked openly as a Jew with my kippah on my head, looking like an observant Jew, nowadays I attract anti-Semitic slurs, which happened last time I was there. And there's a council flats building on the top of the street there that's been painted in the colors of the Palestinian flag. Why would I ever go back there? Why would I feel comfortable living there, investing in such a place, or spending money there? I mean, it's so distasteful. And I can understand that some people have a sense of solidarity with the Palestinians, but the appropriate way to express that solidarity is to encourage the Palestinians to build their own society, to do positive things for themselves, not to murder Jewish children in their homes. So I think that South Africa, perhaps through heavy bias in its own media and the international media it chooses to consume, has a mistaken impression of what's happening in the Middle East. In reality, many Arab countries are making peace with Israel and moving beyond this conflict, and South Africa risks being left holding the bag for a bunch of terrorists who are doing absolutely nothing for South Africa, who are allowing South Africa to drag itself through the mud, and who are not speaking out and doing anything positive. I mean, they're just, it's so bad. It's actually so off-putting, and it's a danger. It's a threat to the Jewish community in South Africa, which has dwindled in number, and I think it's just counterproductive. So, on the one hand, Trump is pressuring South Africa, but on the other hand, South Africa should make changes to its policy and its attitude on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and perhaps on anti-Semitism as well, because its current posture is bad for South Africa. I can't see any positive upside except for the ideological gratification of a few people who like to sing struggle songs.
And there's already been an executive order where aid and assistance has been halted temporarily. And some of the things cited in the executive order have been South Africa's ties with Iran and the Expropriation Act. They also said the discrimination of minorities. Now, if these aren't changed, do you see also further benefits such as AGOA benefits being taken away, or do you see also things like targeted sanctions at specific government officials or leaders?
I think all of that is possible. I think AGOA is in serious trouble. South Africa is in technical violation of AGOA because AGOA says that participating countries cannot take positions contrary to the national security interests of the United States. So I think South Africa's position on Israel, Iran, China, Russia, I think all of that threatens AGOA. And I think the longer that South Africa continues, the longer it, in fact, does risk the because I think the administration understands it doesn't want to punish South Africans collectively for the misdeeds of a few. And I think South Africans will be interested to find out where the money is. If you sanction ANC officials or other people, perhaps even EFF officials and so on, well, where are their overseas assets? Which are the assets that an American administration could seize? And I think South Africans might be interested to know where they are and what they are.
Thank you very, very much for your time and the early start and everything.
Yeah, sure. Mhm.